Most people believe they understand compounding. They've heard the phrase, they've seen the charts, they've watched the examples where small amounts of money somehow turn into massive fortunes over time. But understanding the idea of compounding and actually experiencing it are two completely different realities. Because if compounding were as simple as people claim, far more individuals would retire wealthy. Far more people would reach financial independence. Far more would quietly accumulate life-changing levels of capital. But that's not what happens. Instead, most people invest for years, sometimes decades, and never truly feel the power of compounding. Not because it doesn't exist, but because they unknowingly sabotage it, over and over again, in subtle ways, invisible ways, psychological ways. And unless you recognize these patterns, you can do everything right on the surface and still never reach the phase where compounding actually transforms your life. Because compounding is not just a mathematical phenomenon, it is a behavioral system. And that system either works for you or it quietly works against you. Let's establish something important from the beginning. Compounding does not reward participation. It rewards consistency without interruption. That distinction matters more than most people realize. Because many individuals believe that simply contributing to a retirement account or occasionally investing in the market means they are benefiting from compounding. But compounding is far more demanding than that. It requires time. It requires patience. And most importantly, it requires the absence of interference. And interference is where everything breaks down. The first silent killer of compounding is impatience. Not the obvious kind. Not the kind where someone pulls all their money out immediately, but the subtle impatience that shows up in disguised forms. Checking accounts too often, comparing progress to others, expecting visible results too early. Compounding, in its early stages, is almost imperceptible. It does not feel rewarding. It does not feel exciting. It does not validate your efforts. In fact, it often feels like nothing is happening at all. And that is precisely why most people abandon the process. Because the human brain is not wired to appreciate delayed exponential outcomes. It is wired for immediate feedback, immediate reward, immediate confirmation. So when months, or even years, pass without noticeable change, doubt begins to form. And once doubt enters the equation, consistency begins to erode. But impatience is only the beginning. The second and far more destructive factor is interruption. Compounding is incredibly sensitive to disruption. It thrives on continuity. But most financial behaviors are built around interruption. People pause contributions. They withdraw funds. They reallocate aggressively. They attempt to time markets. They react to headlines. They respond to fear. And each time they do, they are not just making a small adjustment. They are fracturing the compounding process itself. Because compounding depends on uninterrupted growth. And when that growth is repeatedly halted, even briefly, the long-term outcome changes dramatically. Not slightly, dramatically. There is a concept rarely discussed in personal finance, but it is central to understanding this dynamic. It is the concept of compounding momentum. Momentum in compounding is not linear. It builds gradually, then accelerates rapidly. But that acceleration only occurs if the system remains intact long enough. When you interrupt the process, you don't just lose time. You lose momentum. And rebuilding that momentum is far more difficult than starting in the first place. Because now you are not progressing forward. You are attempting to recover lost ground. Another reason most people never experience real compounding is lifestyle inflation. This is perhaps the most socially reinforced form of self-sabotage. As income increases, so do expenses. As opportunities expand, so do expectations. And as financial capacity grows, so does consumption. This creates a paradox. People earn more money than ever before, yet remain in the same financial position. Because the additional income is absorbed, not invested. And without increasing the amount of capital being exposed to compounding, the results remain stagnant. This is why some individuals can earn six figures for decades and still fail to accumulate significant wealth. Not because they lacked income, but because they lacked preservation and allocation discipline. Now let's go deeper. There is a psychological barrier that prevents people from fully committing to long-term compounding. And that barrier is uncertainty. The future is unknown. Markets fluctuate. Economic conditions change. And because of this uncertainty, people hesitate to fully trust the process. They keep one foot in and one foot out. They invest, but remain emotionally detached. They contribute, but remain mentally prepared to withdraw. They commit, but only partially. And partial commitment produces partial results. Compounding does not respond to hesitation. It responds to conviction. Conviction, however, is difficult to maintain without understanding. And this is where education becomes critical. Not surface-level knowledge, not general advice, but deep, structural understanding of how wealth is actually built over time. Because when you understand the mechanics of compounding, you begin to see time differently. You begin to evaluate decisions differently. You begin to prioritize differently. And most importantly, you begin to behave differently. Another overlooked factor is the illusion of progress. In today's environment, people are constantly exposed to rapid success stories, quick wins, fast money, overnight transformations. And this distorts expectations. It creates the impression that wealth should materialize quickly, that progress should be visible, that results should be immediate. But compounding operates on an entirely different timeline. It is slow, deliberate, unimpressive at first. And because it does not align with modern expectations, it is often abandoned in favor of faster, riskier alternatives. Alternatives that feel productive, but rarely produce sustainable results. Let's talk about the middle phase of compounding. This is the stage where most people fail. Not at the beginning, and not at the end, but in the middle. Because the beginning is easy. There is excitement, motivation, a sense of starting something new, and the end is rewarding. There are visible results, the tangible outcomes, clear progress. But the middle is where discipline is tested. It is where monotony sets in, where progress feels slow, where doubt resurfaces, and where consistency becomes difficult to maintain. This is the phase where most people quietly drift away from the process. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but gradually, until one day they are no longer participating at all. The individuals who experience real compounding are the ones who survive the middle. They are not necessarily more intelligent. They are not necessarily more talented, but they are more consistent, more patient, and more disciplined in their behavior. They understand that the middle phase is not a sign of failure. It is a necessary stage of the process. And by continuing through it, they position themselves to reach the phase where compounding accelerates. Now consider this. Compounding does not announce itself. There is no moment where it suddenly becomes obvious. No clear signal that says this is where it starts working. Instead, it builds quietly, gradually, until one day, the results become undeniable. And by that point, the foundation has already been established. Years, sometimes decades, earlier. This is why early decisions matter so much. Because compounding is front-loaded with importance. The actions you take in the beginning have disproportionate impact on the outcome. Yet most people treat the early phase casually. They delay. They hesitate. They minimize contributions. They underestimate the significance of time. And by the time they recognize its importance, they no longer have as much of it. But this is not about perfection. It is about alignment. Aligning your behavior with the principles that allow compounding to function. Consistency, patience, discipline, long-term thinking, minimizing interference, maximizing time. These are not complicated concepts, but they are difficult to maintain in a world that constantly encourages the opposite. So the question becomes, how do you actually experience real compounding? Not just understand it, not just believe in it, but live it. You begin by removing friction from investing, automating contributions, eliminating decision fatigue, reducing the likelihood of interruption, You create systems that operate independently of your emotions, because emotions are inconsistent. Systems are reliable. You commit to increasing contributions over time, not dramatically, but consistently, allowing your investment capacity to grow alongside your income, without allowing lifestyle inflation to absorb the difference. You limit exposure to noise, financial media, market speculation, short-term narratives, because these inputs are designed to provoke reaction, and reaction disrupts compounding. You redefine progress, not as immediate gains, but as sustained participation, because the real measure of success in compounding is not short-term performance. It is long-term consistency. And perhaps most importantly, you accept the timeline. You stop expecting rapid transformation. You stop comparing your journey to others. You stop seeking validation from short-term results. And instead, you focus on maintaining the process, day after day, month after month, year after year. Because eventually, the process begins to reward you. Not immediately, not dramatically, but inevitably. And when it does, it changes everything. Because at that point, you are no longer relying on effort alone. You are benefiting from accumulation, from momentum, from exponential growth. And that is the moment most people never reach. Not because it is unattainable, but because they never stayed long enough. If you take one thing from this, let it be this: compounding is not something you turn on. It is something you allow to happen, by staying consistent long enough for it to take over. If this shifted your perspective, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Smart Money Compounds. Because here, we don't just talk about money. We build the mindset and systems that make it multiply.